Have you ever imagined, in just a few short minutes, a seemingly normal act of disrespect on an airplane could shake up an entire airline corporation? A black man, neatly dressed, sat quietly in his first-class seat. But just because a white passenger thought that seat didn't belong to him, the entire crew asked him to leave his seat. None of them knew. That man was Derrick Coleman, the CEO of the corporation that owned the airline. Just 5 minutes later, before the plane even landed, those seemingly harmless actions sparked a seismic shift in morality, power, and social awareness. And when the truth was revealed, not only did a few people lose their jobs, but the entire airline industry had to change so that no one would be treated as inferior because of the color of their skin. This is not just a story about power, but a story about human dignity, about how one offended man chose wisdom over anger and turned humiliation into reform. If you believe that respect should not depend on skin color or status, come with me to the end of this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on stories that touch your heart and change the way you see the world. Now, let's get started. The AeroLux Airlines Boeing 787 glided through the clouds at over 30,000 feet, the midday sun bathing the first-class cabin in gold. The air was quiet, except for the hum of the engines and the smell of freshly poured espresso from the service counter. Derrick Coleman, a black man in his early 40s, sat in seat 2A, next to the window. His Navy suit and Patek Philippe watch lit up as he turned the last page of his second quarter report. Everything about him was neat, controlled, and so quiet it was almost too quiet. On the tray in front of me, the ticket was clearly printed AeroLux Airlines, first class, seat 2A, paid and confirmed. 3 weeks prior, flight attendant Lauren Baker approached, her smile a carefully practiced courtesy, but her voice held the authority of someone accustomed to serving the elite. "Excuse me, sir, there is a small change. We need you to move to seat 14B in economy." Derrick looked up, calm. "For what reason?" Ma'am Lauren clutched the clipboard, eyes unfocused. "Platinum guest, Mr. Gregory Stanton, requires this seat. His assistant called ahead to make arrangements for medical reasons." She paused, as if the word medical would be enough to end any argument. But there was no document, no certificate, only the commanding tone of someone who believed she was right. Derrick gently closed his laptop. He checked his ticket again, then looked up at her, his eyes still gentle. "My ticket clearly said first class. I paid in full, and I received no notice of any changes." The words were spoken slowly, clearly, without a trace of anger, but it was precisely that calmness that made Lauren impatient. She turned to look at a passenger behind her who was silently filming on her phone. In row 3B, Olivia Park, a Korean-American girl, just turned on live stream on her personal account first-class drama. Everyone. Something is brewing. The views started to climb. The first comments came in what happened. Did he do something wrong? Let me guess. He doesn't look like a first-class person. The air in the cabin became thick. A few glances turned to Derrick, glances that were not malicious, but contained unconscious suspicion. The black man, in a neat suit, in a first-class seat. Was he really a guest? Lauren kept her smile, but her voice started to get cold. "I was just following procedure, sir. I appreciate your cooperation to avoid disrupting the flight." Derrick didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, a vast expanse of blue sky, as calm as his mind. Then he turned back, his voice low but firm. "I would like to see your medical records and speak to your supervisor." Lauren paused. She pressed the call button a few minutes later. "Ethan Grant, the head flight attendant, walked in. A silver-haired man with 20 years of experience, the gait of someone accustomed to being in charge. Ethan glanced at Derrick, then at Lauren, his eyes saying, "I'll handle it." "Hello," he said, his voice thick and hard. "I'm the chief steward for this flight. We need your seat for a special passenger. I appreciate your understanding." Derrick opened his wallet, took out the ticket, and placed it gently on the table. "My seat is 2A. I would like to know what regulations allow airlines to force legitimate passengers to leave their purchased seats." Ethan didn't answer the question. He just tilted his head, as if talking to a stubborn child. "You can file your complaint later. Now, please move so the plane can continue its journey." Derrick exhaled, nodding slightly. He didn't want to cause a ruckus in the cabin, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that the truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be recorded. He took the phone and said softly, "Can I have your names and employee codes?" Lauren and Ethan looked at each other, then read each word aloud. They thought he was just an annoying customer. Little did they know he had just completed the first step of an internal disciplinary process. A moment later, Derrick stood up. He adjusted his jacket and bowed to a passenger beside him, who was looking at him with concern. He left seat 2A, walked past row 3, then 5, then 10, all the way to 14B, economy class. Each step was followed by a long silence, no objections, just the observation of dozens of pairs of eyes. In first class, Gregory Stanton, a white man with silver hair, a gold watch, and a red tie, just walked in. He smiled at Lauren. "Thank you. I know your company always prioritizes loyal customers." Lauren smiled in relief. Little did she know, at that moment, the entire compartment had become a stage of silent justice, where every little action was being recorded, not just by cameras, but by the eyes of hundreds of people. In row 14B, Derrick opened his laptop. The screen reflected off his face, calm, focused. He logged into AeroLux Airlines' internal system, using an account that only a few people in the world had access to. The text appears, "Welcome, Derrick Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, Coleman Industries." A smile flashed across his face, not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone accustomed to seeing prejudice operate as a system. He opened the folder. Corporate Policy, Anti-Discrimination Protocol, Clause 12.4. Olivia's live stream continued, now watched by thousands. Comments poured in. He kept his cool. Such respect. If this is discrimination, this company is dead. Lauren started to feel worried, and Ethan just crossed his arms. When we land, it will all be over. Little did Ethan know, what awaited him on the ground was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a seismic shift in the entire aviation industry. In that quiet sky, everyone thought the incident had calmed down. But for those who have endured contempt, they know silence is never the end. It is only the stage before justice begins to speak. Lauren Baker returned to first class, holding her clipboard, her mouth pressed together. She knew the passenger in seat 2A. The black man in the suit wasn't arguing, but his calm gaze made her uneasy. Lauren reassured herself, "I'm just following procedure, just rearranging seats for VIPs." However, the way she spoke was not as gentle as before. "Mr. Gregory Stanton's assistant called ahead. She said, her voice a little cold, "Mr. Stanton has medical reasons and needs to be seated closer to the door. I hope you understand." Derrick Coleman looked up, his eyes unchanging. "I understand. But if it's medical, Can you show me the paperwork to confirm it? Lauren was momentarily confused. There was no paperwork. No official call had been made. All she heard was the flight attendant reply that Mr. Stanton is a platinum passenger. Please do not cause trouble. Not wanting to show her embarrassment, she stood up straight and said firmly, Sir, I expect you to cooperate immediately. This is not the time to argue. The words immediately rang out clearly, and despite her polite smile, Lauren knew she had crossed a line of respect. Derrick didn't respond right away. He opened the ticket again, flipped through the reservation code, and placed it neatly on the tray. Everything was correct. First class, 2A, paid in full, no special notes. From row 3B, Olivia Park was still live streaming. She was slow motioning. Her voice cut through the engine noise. Guys, he was so calm. But why didn't the flight attendant show any proof? Views started to rise rapidly. Comments flooded in. Is this discrimination? If it was a white customer, this wouldn't have happened. It's 2025. Why is this happening? Lauren glanced over to see the phone recording. Her lips pursed slightly. The light from the screen reflected off her face, making her feel dizzy. She turned to Ethan Grant, who was standing nearby, her eyes pleading for help. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low enough for Derrick to hear. Leave Mr. Stanton alone. Don't cause any more trouble. Lauren, we just need to finish the flight. Then he turned to Derrick, speaking more softly, but with barely concealed contempt in his voice. Sir, there are little things that are sometimes best left unsaid. This particular passenger is close to the airline. You understand. Derrick remained silent. No reaction, no argument. He simply tilted his head, as if taking in their every word, every expression. Thank you, he replied softly. I just want to make sure that every decision here is made by process, not by emotion. The words came out slowly, but it made the atmosphere in the cabin suddenly heavy. Lauren looked around and saw that a few passengers were starting to look at her no longer sympathetically, but suspiciously. Olivia whispered into the phone. Oh my God, he never got angry. He was so calm. A middle-aged passenger in row 1C turned to his companion and whispered, He's right. If it were me, I would have raised my voice. Lauren tried to keep her voice casual. Sorry, sir. I was just doing my job. Nothing else. Derrick just nodded. I trust you meant nothing else. Then he looked out the window and added, his voice lower, It's just that sometimes the way we go about our duties reveals who we believe is more worthy of our respect. Lauren froze. The words were as light as a breath, but they made her choke. She turned away, trying to hold back a smile, but her hand holding the clipboard began to shake. Ethan turned to the other passengers and lowered his voice. There are people who, even in first class, still don't know where their seat is. The comment made it onto the live stream. Comments exploded. Oh my God, what did he just say? That's blatant racism. This is why we need cameras on planes. Olivia inhaled sharply, her eyes glued to the screen. She knew this video would go viral, very viral. Derrick sat still, his hands clasped in his lap. He said nothing, offered no excuses. There was only silence in his eyes. Like the surface of water, the calmer it was, the deeper it seemed. Lauren stepped back, trying to remain professional. I'll report this to my superiors, sir, she said quietly. Thanks, Derrick replied. Please help me get the right name for the head steward. She nodded, then turned quickly away. Ethan looked after her, shrugging. We can't please everyone. Lauren, but don't worry. The flight is over. Lauren wasn't sure. There was something in the man's eyes in seat 14B that made her uneasy. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't. She'd had her share of angry passengers, yellers, and threats of lawsuits, but they'd always left her feeling better than this. Derrick hadn't done anything. He just made her feel like she'd been looked in the mirror. She took a deep breath and looked toward the front cabin, where Gregory Stanton was leaning back in his chair, headphones on, smiling contentedly. He had just texted his assistant, AeroLux still knows who matters. Lauren read the sign as she walked by. She bit her lip, and for the first time, saw something was wrong with the way the company was run. First class, which should have been the quietest, was now tense. No one spoke, but all eyes were on the same person, the black man sitting quietly in the back, his laptop open, typing something slowly. Olivia saw it and said softly in the live stream. He turned on his computer and seemed to be writing a complaint. But no, looking at his expression, he wasn't the type to complain. There was something bigger. One viewer commented, "Who knows? Maybe he's flying for the airline itself." Olivia chuckled. If it's true, it's a plot twist. No one knows. They are right. Derrick typed a few lines and saved. The screen displayed a green security icon, the Coleman Industries internal portal. He looked up at the ceiling of the capsule, as if he could hear the very breath of the system operating around him, a system he had built, trusted, and now watched as it slipped from the orbit of fairness. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Don't be angry, just remember." Then he opened his eyes and looked at his watch. There was still an hour and a half until landing. An hour and a half, enough time for a story to begin to spread from this sealed capsule, across 1,000 phone screens, and down to the ground, where justice would await. Lauren leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. Ethan crossed his arms, looking calm. Gregory closed his eyes, taking his seat for granted. Only Derrick remained silent, as if he had seen through everyone's fate. Olivia's live stream gained hundreds of views with each passing second. But amid the commotion, Derrick sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the window. He knew the truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be proven through process. The AeroLux first-class cabin remained luxurious, but the atmosphere was different. The glances were cautious, half sympathetic, half curious. Everyone sensed something was going on that was beyond a minor incident. Lauren Baker stood near the kitchen, her heart pounding. She looked over at Derrick, the black man still sitting calmly in the economy seat, ticket in hand, eyes staring out the window as if he had no care in the world. But she knew he was still watching. Ethan Grant, the head steward, stepped forward. He had the confident walk of someone who had handled thousands of difficult customers. He stood next to Derrick's chair and leaned in. "Sir, we've explained the situation. Mr. Stanton has a medical reason, and we appreciate your cooperation." Derrick slowly turned around, his eyes not sharp, just calm. "Can you show me the medical documents to prove it?" Ethan paused. He hadn't expected the question to be asked so calmly. Normally, the customer would have reacted by screaming, threatening to sue, or throwing tickets at him. But this person, his voice was steady as a heartbeat, word for word, clear and inescapable. "Sir," Ethan said, "I don't have the documents here, but I assure you the request came from ground control. You can file a complaint after the plane lands." Derrick nodded slightly. "I will. But before that, let me speak to your immediate superior, or the flight operations representative." Lauren looked at Ethan, worried. "Mr. Grant, should we call the center?" Ethan shook his head. "No, we won't complicate things." Then he turned back to Derrick. his voice firmer. "Sir, this is flight control. We need your cooperation. The safety of our passengers is our top priority." From row 3B, Olivia raised her camera again. In the live stream, comments poured in. "That's not safety reasons. It's discrimination." He asked the right question. This chief flight attendant sounds like she's giving orders. Derrick exhaled slowly. He didn't react, only saying one sentence that silenced the entire cabin. "I understand. I will cooperate. But before you leave your seats, please give me both of your full names and employee numbers." Lauren was stunned. Ethan frowned. "Sir, that's not necessary." Derrick smiled faintly. "Oh, yes. I want to make sure when I file a complaint, the information is accurate." His voice was still soft, not threatening, but to those used to giving orders, that calmness was more intimidating than any scolding. Lauren looked at Ethan, then reluctantly said, "Lauren Baker, employee number 4827. Ethan slowly continued. "Ethan Grant, Chief Steward, Code 1093. Derrick wrote it down, carefully, word for word. He didn't say anything else, but the way he nodded, a slight nod of acknowledgement, sent a chill down Lauren's spine. Ethan thought he was just a difficult passenger. He was used to people like Derrick eventually giving up, falling silent from exhaustion. Little did he know, Derrick's every move from asking for his employee ID to taking notes was not the action of someone who was at a disadvantage, but of someone gathering evidence. Lauren tried to smile and change the subject. "Sir, we really didn't mean to offend. Mr. Stanton is a long-time customer, and the company has always had a special customer support policy. Especially," Derrick interrupted, "meaning having the right to force someone else to vacate a legally purchased seat." His voice was not loud, but each word seemed to fall into the air. Heavy. Lauren bowed her head, unable to answer. Olivia was still filming. The audience in the live stream was boiling. She didn't dare look straight. He was so calm and composed. It felt like he knew something they didn't. Derrick gently closed the notebook and put away his pen. He said nothing more. His eyes, for a moment, were fixed on the AeroLux logo on the first-class wall. The eyes of someone who knew the ins and outs of that system better than anyone else here. Ethan felt uncomfortable. "Sir, I have to ask you to move down now. The plane is about to descend. We need to ensure regulations." Derrick stood up, slowly. He picked up his laptop, closed it slightly, and said, "I'll transfer it. But remember, I'm not doing this because I'm pressured to. I'm doing this because I want to see how your process works when you land." Lauren stiffened. Ethan tried to smile politely. "Thank you very much for your cooperation." Derrick nodded slightly. "Cooperation does not mean acceptance. I am simply giving you the opportunity to complete a mistake in order." He walked. His shoes clicked lightly on the floor, a slow, steady rhythm that silenced the entire compartment. Olivia watched through the camera lens and said softly, "That's not the walk of a loser. That's the walk of a person counting down." Lauren took a deep breath and turned to Ethan. "Mr. Grant, what if he really is someone important?" Ethan chuckled. "You worry too much. Who is he?" "A businessman. At most he writes online. It will pass, like every other time." But Lauren couldn't smile. She had a vague feeling that this time things would be different. The way Derrick looked at her, no judgment, no hate. It was like he had already seen the outcome and was just waiting for it to happen. In row 14B, Derrick sat down. He opened his laptop, the light of the screen reflecting off his face. Calm, quiet. He typed in a few characters. Accessing the security system. The Coleman Industries logo appeared. A very small smile flashed across his face. On Olivia's live stream, a new comment appeared. Someone check what Coleman Industries is. Wait. Oh my God. That's the parent company of AeroLux Airlines. The last sentence caused the chat thread to explode. Olivia stared at the screen. No way. Then she looked up and saw the man sitting in row 14B, calm, quiet, and seemingly unaware that thousands of people out there had just recognized who he was. No one said anything more. The engine hum continued, but the atmosphere had changed. At 30,000 feet, a seat reassignment had become an ethics test for the entire airline system, and Derrick Coleman, who had been forced into economy, was the man secretly overseeing the test. He glanced at his watch and said to himself, exactly 45 minutes to landing. Enough time for justice to begin writing its first report. His eyes stopped at the first-class door, where Ethan and Lauren were still making small talk. Completely unaware that their names were about to be printed on the airline's highest-level internal report. The plane was still quiet, but beneath the silence, justice had begun to move, quietly, surely, and unstoppable, to avoid the noise on the plane preparing to descend. Derrick Coleman agreed to move to seat 14B, but before leaving, he asked the staff for his business card, a small detail, but enough to open a seismic storm after the plane touched down. Lauren hesitated at the request. She pulled a white card with a silver AeroLux logo from her uniform pocket and handed it to him with a trembling hand. Ethan followed suit, trying to act casual, as if this were just a routine customer service procedure. "Thanks," Derrick said quietly. He put the 2 cards in the inside pocket of his wallet and folded them carefully, unbeknownst to anyone. In that moment, his every action was being recorded like fragments of a future report, a report that could change the fate of the airline. Lauren forced a smile. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll make sure you're well taken care of below deck," Derrick replied softly. "I believe so." Then he stood up. No grumble, no angry glance, just a man packing up his laptop, grabbing his jacket, adjusting his tie, and walking away with a strange calmness. Olivia Park continued live streaming, the camera following him. Her voice softened. "He's really gone." Still not saying a word loudly. "I've never seen anyone stay so calm." The people around whispered. A few wanted to intervene, but then decided against it. In first class, where tickets cost 10 times more than normal, people didn't like trouble. They just liked to see it happen to others. Derrick walked down the aisle, a few passengers' eyes following him as if they were seeing something that shouldn't be here. He didn't look back. Each step was deep, even, and controlled. Behind her, Lauren felt her throat dry. There was something about that walk that made her not dare to tell herself she was right. Ethan was different. He nodded slightly, turning back to the service cabin, as if he had just cleared up a small nuisance. The first-class cabin was quiet again, except for the smell of coffee and new leather seats. Then, a few minutes later, Gregory Stanton appeared, a man with gray hair, a gray suit, and shiny shoes. He stepped onto the deck with the air of someone accustomed to being let out of the way. Lauren," he said, his voice tinged with kindness. "I take it you've settled that little matter." Lauren nodded slightly. "Yes, Mr. Stanton. Everything is fine. You can take seat 2A. Gregory smiled contentedly. He tossed his coat into the overhead bin, adjusted his collar, and sank into his seat. "Thank you. It's good to fly with a company that values its customers." That made Lauren laugh awkwardly, and Ethan turned away, avoiding the gaze of a few passengers who were still secretly filming on their phones. Olivia Park held the camera and whispered into the live stream. "He is the one who took that guy's seat. He looks really smug, but if you notice, the other two staff members don't seem to be comfortable." Gregory opened the financial newspaper, sipped champagne, unaware that thousands of people were watching him on the small screen. In cabin 14B, Derrick sat still. He didn't touch the water, didn't read the newspaper. He just opened his laptop and watched the data appear. A text file titled, "Incident 0425, Cabin Discrimination Report, AeroLux Flight AL317. He typed in a few short notes. Passenger asked to leave first class without valid reason. No documentation. Staff Lauren Baker, Ethan Grant. Then he saved it, turned off the screen. There was no sign of anger. If anything, it was the silence everyone had shown. Not because they were evil, but because they were afraid. A middle-aged white man sitting next to him said softly, "You're really calm. If I were you, I would have made a fuss." Derrick looked over and smiled. Sometimes, noise just makes people forget what is right. Silence, it makes people listen, even if they don't want to. The other man nodded, saying nothing more. Perhaps he did not understand everything, but he felt the difference. The economy cabin was a little cramped, but Derrick didn't mind. He pulled out his phone, opened the internal newsletter, and checked some data about the airline. A notification from the management system popped up in the corner of the screen. Coleman Industries. Annual report pending approval. He looked at the words for a moment, then closed his eyes. No one here knew that the man who was asked to leave his first-class seat was the one who had the power to sign every investment, every report, and every contract that kept AeroLux Airlines operating. Above, the plane began to lose altitude. The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Dear passengers, we are preparing to land at Los Angeles Airport. Please fasten your seat belts." Lauren crossed the compartment, her eyes briefly glancing at Derrick. She wanted to say something, maybe an apology, but her lip trembled, and she stopped. He looked back at her, nodding slightly, not in anger, just a confirmation that he saw, understood, and remembered. Olivia, from row 3B, lowered her camera. Her live stream had reached over 10,000 views. Comments flooded in, half indignant, half in disbelief. She sighed. In her head, she knew when the plane touched down, this wouldn't end here. Gregory leaned back in seat 2A, pulling back the thin blanket. He sighed in relief, satisfied with the spacious seat. Little did he know, the seat he was leaning against belonged to the man who owned the airline he was praising. Derrick opened his eyes and looked at his watch. Outside, Los Angeles was looming behind a thin layer of clouds. The city lights reflected off the night sky, shimmering like 1,000 eyes watching. He clutched the ticket in his hand. The words were still there. First class, 2A, paid in full. It was not just proof of purchase, but a symbol of something deeper, the right to be respected, not because of status, but because of one's humanity. The plane shuddered as the landing gear touched the runway. Seatbelts began to be unbuckled. Seats were heard bouncing, and people were talking in hushed voices. Everyone thought it was over. Only Derrick, he knew. Things were just beginning. Lauren stood by the door, awkwardly greeting the passengers. As Derrick passed, she whispered, "Sir, I hope you don't mind." Derrick paused for a second, looking at her. "I don't mind," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I just take note." That statement made her silent. Gregory walked out last, still smirking. As he passed, Derrick glanced at him, then looked away. He didn't need to say anything. Some truths just needed to be revealed in the right place and at the right time. At the arrivals gate, Olivia stopped streaming, but she still watched Derrick. There was something about this man that made her feel justice may be silent, but it will not sleep. Derrick took out his phone and opened the internal application. He sent a short message, just 6 words long. Urgent report, Gate 32, Los Angeles. Then he put the phone away and walked towards the large glass door where the light was shining in. In the reflection, his figure was as calm, straight, and still as a sentence waiting to be pronounced. Under the Los Angeles sky, as the plane landed, thousands of shares of the live stream began to spread. No one knew that a storm of justice was forming, and the person who started it was forced to leave his seat just because of the color of his skin. As the plane hovered a few thousand feet above the ground, the economy cabin was still dimly lit, save for the hum of the fans and the slow roll of the wheels. Derrick Coleman was still sitting in seat 14B, as if nothing had happened. But the laptop on his tray table lit up a secure window, for the AeroLux internal corporate network had just opened. His fingers moved lightly, operating with the ease of someone familiar with the system. The facial recognition access code was scanned, and within seconds, the screen displayed "Welcome, Derrick Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, Coleman Industries." A light reflected in his eyes. Calm. Precise. Without much searching, he opened the folder labeled Compliance and Ethics. Therein lay the clause he had personally approved 18 months ago, Clause 12.4, AeroLux Anti-Discrimination Policy. The brief text read, "Any act of direct or indirect discrimination between employees and passengers is considered a serious offense. All allegations must be addressed immediately at the regional management level." Derrick read the words again, nodding slightly. He didn't smile, but there was something almost sad about the corners of his mouth. In first class. Lauren Baker checked the passenger list on her handheld device. Her hand shook slightly. Every time she saw the name Derrick Coleman, first class, seat 2A. Her heart beat faster. She felt wrong, but Ethan remained cool and composed. "Don't worry," Ethan said quietly when she looked around. "We followed procedure. Just land, write the report, and be done. They forget quickly." Lauren bit her lip. "What about that video? The girl in row 3B is still filming." Ethan shrugged. "The internet is full of such things. Who has time to care?" Little did they know, tens of thousands of people were watching the exact moment they said that. Olivia Park, a passenger in seat 3B, kept her phone pointed towards the front of the cabin. Her voice trembled slightly with excitement and frustration. "You see, he didn't cause any trouble. He just asked about the procedure and was sent to the economy cabin. They still haven't provided any evidence. Views on the live stream jumped. 2,000 stores, then 4,000 ojos, then 7,000 ojos. Several big accounts started resharing the video with the hashtags Jackers or AeroLux discrimination, first-class racism. Flying, while black comments flooded the screen. "This is why I stopped flying AeroLux. Do they think black people can't afford first class? Watch out. Social media won't let this go." In compartment 14B, Derrick received the first notification, an email from Coleman Industries Communications Department. With the subject line "Viral Alert AeroLux Flight Discrimination Clip," trending in Los Angeles. He read, exhaling slowly. Everything was happening just as he had predicted, faster than the plane could descend. He typed a few short messages into the internal system. Temporarily lock Ethan Grant and Lauren Baker's personnel access. Open policy file. 12.4 to all regional staff. Prepare for emergency meeting at Gate 32, LAX. The message was sent over a private control channel, silent, no bell, but enough to activate the entire machine waiting for orders on the ground. Lauren had no idea what was going on. She only felt her phone vibrate in her uniform pocket. AeroLux employee portal. Session expired. She looked at Ethan, confused. "Did you?" Ethan laughed. "The system must be down again. You always worry too much." In the back seat, Derrick closed his laptop and leaned his head back. His eyes were closed, but every detail of the incident played out in slow motion. In his mind, their words, their attitudes, the way they looked at him as if he were an intruder. Not the first time, but probably the last time anyone at AeroLux will dare to do this. On the live stream, Olivia bowed her head and whispered to the audience, "We're about to land. If anyone has relatives who work for this airline, please send them this." This is a classic example of discrimination that people pretend not to see. One viewer commented, "I am a lawyer. Give me the guy's email. We will contact him." Another, "Does anyone know his name? I want to find him." Olivia looked back at the first video as Derrick held out his ticket. The words clearly read, "Mr. Derrick Coleman." She spoke the name softly, as if to memorize it. "Derrick Coleman." A viewer quickly searched. Seconds later, the comments section exploded. "Holy shit! Derrick Coleman is the CEO of Coleman Industries, the company that owns AeroLux Airlines." Olivia paused for a few seconds, her eyes wide. She looked around the cabin, then pointed the camera down to row 14. The man was still sitting there, quietly, staring out the window. No one would have guessed that the person being asked to move down to economy was the owner of the airline. She said nothing more. The live stream went from angry to quiet, as if she had just realized she was witnessing a historic power shift right in the air. Lauren glanced at the passengers and saw some whispering. A young woman whispered, "I think he's the CEO of the airline. The internet says so." Ethan laughed awkwardly. "Nonsense. Someone like that would never fly without an assistant. Just a rumor." Lauren wasn't sure. Her palms were sweating. Anxiety crept into her every breath. She remembered the moment he asked for her business card. The way he'd said, "I'm just taking notes, not a polite remark." She realized now, in compartment 14B, Derrick opened his laptop again. On the screen, a message appeared. Viral ranking update. AeroLux discrimination, #1 trending in Los Angeles. He looked at the words, not with joy, not with anger, just with the look of someone who knows justice does not need to be created. It just needs to be activated at the right moment. He typed one last line to his assistant in Los Angeles. "Prepare an emergency meeting. Don't block the media. Let them see our entire real-life operation." The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "We are approaching the runway. Please remain seated." Lauren looked out the window, her heart racing. Ethan crossed his arms, confident, thinking that once the wheels touched down, it would all be over. But somewhere behind them, the man they despised was preparing for another earthquake, a meeting they never expected. The plane rocked gently as it landed. In those few seconds of silence, only one truth echoed in Lauren's mind. They had messed with the wrong person. Derrick opened his eyes slightly, looking at the city lights streaming in through the window. He knew that as soon as the wheels touched down, not only the crew, but the entire AeroLux system would have to look at itself. Justice, sometimes, is not loud. It only takes one person calm enough to make the world listen. The plane landed safely at Los Angeles International Airport. But this time, instead of rushing out of their seats, Many remained seated. They knew this flight was not over. Justice, it seemed, was just leaving the ground. A soft pop sounded as the landing gear touched the runway. The passengers breathed a sigh of relief. A few clapped out of habit. But the atmosphere on the flight was strangely quiet. The silence was not because of fatigue, but because everyone felt that something bigger was waiting outside the door. Lauren Baker adjusted her cap and took a deep breath. She had flown hundreds of flights, but none had ever felt as long as this. Derrick's words kept ringing in her head. I just take notes. The word take notes sounded light, but to her, it felt like a sentence. Ethan Grant, still sitting in the front seat near the cabin door, was on his phone. He saw poor AeroLux discrimination trending in the Los Angeles area. He quickly turned off the screen and sneered, "Social media is always exaggerating. Who remembers after we land?" Lauren was silent, unresponsive. She looked down at row 14 where Derrick Coleman was still sitting, his hands in his lap, his eyes fixed on the window. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't seem upset. He just sat there, as if counting the beats to a song that only he could hear. In first class, Gregory Stanton had just woken up from a nap. He stretched, satisfied, and called up Lauren. "Thank you. It was a great flight." Lauren forced a smile and thanked him back, but her eyes flashed with embarrassment. As the plane came to a stop, passengers began unbuckling their seat belts. But instead of rushing out as usual, many took out their phones to film. Some even live-streamed the moment the passenger in seat 14B stood up. Olivia Park still held the phone. She looked around and whispered to the audience, "Everyone, the plane landed, but he hasn't gotten off yet. I think he's waiting for something." Her views were soaring. Comments were pouring in. "Any news, I heard he's the CEO of that company. If that's true, the best part is coming." Lauren stepped forward, intending to tell Derrick he could leave the plane. But when his eyes glanced up, she paused. There was no anger, no reproach, just a calm, knowing look. "Thank you," Derrick said calmly, "but I'll stay a while. I have some business to take care of." Lauren swallowed. "Yes, sir. I'll let the head stewardess know." Ethan approached, his voice commanding as if everything was already settled. "Sir, we need to prepare for the next flight. Please leave the cabin soon." Derrick tilted his head slightly. "I know. I just need a few minutes. This is related to the company's internal procedures." Ethan laughed. "You talk like you work for AeroLux." A nearby passenger heard and chuckled, but Olivia, who was still filming, remained silent. In her view, Ethan's confident smile only highlighted the composure of the man across from him. Derrick didn't reply, just opened his phone and pressed a few buttons. At that moment, at the Los Angeles airport, AeroLux's control system received the message, "CEO arrival. Emergency meeting gate 32. A chain of internal messages quickly spread from the communications department to the regional executive director. Within 10 minutes, AeroLux's senior management team at LAX was urgently summoned. No one knew the reason, only that the system clearly stated direct order. D. Coleman, on the plane. Lauren received a short message from the ground manager. Remain in your positions and await further instructions. Do not allow passengers to leave the aircraft." She looked at Ethan, her lips trembling. "Grant, I think something big is happening." Ethan frowned. "You're imagining things. Go do your job." But his voice was less firm. When he looked back at Derrick, he caught a glimpse of the Coleman Industries logo on his phone, the same one he'd seen on a high-level contract for the company. A vague premonition crept into his mind. It couldn't be. Outside, The ground staff had begun to gather. A few passengers stood at the exit, filming, waiting for the end. Derrick sat still, waiting. He knew his silence was more frightening than any accusation. Not because he had any right, but because he wanted them to see their own error right where they thought they were right. Olivia ended the live stream, whispering to him as she walked by. "I think you just taught them a lesson that the whole network is watching." Derrick smiled slightly. "I didn't teach anyone. I just let them see for themselves." About 10 minutes later, the plane's loudspeaker announced, "Please remain seated for a moment. There is an internal inspection request from the airline." The cabin was in an uproar. Lauren stood still, her hands clenched. Ethan tried to keep his composure, but sweat began to form on his temples. The cabin door opened. 3 ground staff and a man in a black suit entered. Lauren recognized him immediately. It was Harold Reyes, the station manager of AeroLux in Los Angeles, a man known for his strictness and who rarely boarded the plane himself. "Mr. Coleman," Harold said formally, "please come with me. The conference room is ready at gate 32. Everyone fell silent. Lauren turned to Ethan. Ethan tried to smile, but his face was pale. You said, Mr. Coleman, Ethan stammered. Harold looked at him coldly. "Mr. Derrick Coleman, CEO of Coleman Industries, the parent company of AeroLux Airlines." A murmur ran through the cabin. A few people turned to look at each other. Olivia covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Gregory Stanton, who had just emerged from first class, stopped, bewildered. Lauren felt her heart stop. The pieces began to come together in her mind, the way he said it, the way he asked for the procedure, and the "I just take notes." Ethan stood there, stunned. He tried to smile, to say something, but Derrick turned and looked straight at him. "Mr. Grant, I believe you now understand what I mean by internal procedures." His voice was even, neither high nor low. But in that moment, Ethan felt as if he had been reflected back by the entire system, a person with 20 years of experience, lost to just a calm look. Derrick nodded to Lauren. "Thank you for keeping calmer than I expected." Lauren choked up and softly replied, "I am sorry, sir. He just said, 'I know.'" Then he and Harold stepped out of the compartment, with dozens of passengers looking on. Some people started clapping, not because he had won, but because they understood. Sometimes, justice doesn't need to be fought for. It just requires the right person to stand up at the right time. As the plane doors closed, Ethan slumped into his seat. Lauren looked at him, speechless, in first class. Gregory Stanton stood frozen, clutching his bag, as if he had just realized that seat 2A was worth more than his career. Outside, Derrick walked in silence. The yellow lights of the airport reflected on his face, calm, deep, and bright. He did not look back, because he knew his silence was enough for the entire system to look back at itself. At Pacific Terminal, Gate 32, Derrick stepped out into the swirling crowd. He handed out his business card. Derrick Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, Coleman Industries, and in that moment, all eyes in the airport turned to the man who had been asked to leave his first-class seat. The air at the exit gate was compressed. There was a moment of suffocating silence, broken only by the distant loudspeaker calling for another flight. But at Gate 32, all sounds seemed to have died down, save for the pounding of hearts. Derrick stood up straight, his suit jacket still pressed despite the 5-hour flight. He didn't say much, just pulled a gold-plated business card from his pocket and placed it neatly on the reception desk. "Derrick Coleman," he said. his voice deep and clear. Chief Executive Officer, Coleman Industries. A young ground staff member, probably in her early 20s, widened her eyes. She glanced at the logo on the business card, then back at him. Her throat was dry, and she was speechless. Coleman Industry, she stammered. You mean... Derrick nodded. Yes. Coleman Industries, the parent company of AeroLux Airlines. The statement was like a boulder dropped into a still pond. The entire Gate 32 area suddenly erupted in whispers. A man in the queue whispered, "Oh my God!" So he owns the airline Olivia Park. Still holding her phone, pointed the camera at him. The live stream screen shook slightly as her hands shook. Did you hear that he is the CEO of the company that owns AeroLux? The guy they just kicked out of first class. Her views skyrocketed. 15,000 oars, then 22,000 oars, then 38,000 oars. Comments poured in like rain. Unbelievable. This is real karma. I want to see the faces of those 2 flight attendants. Derrick didn't look at the camera, nor did he pay any attention to the crowd. He turned to the counterman, his voice calm. I want to see the AeroLux station manager here, right here at the gate, and I want to do it in public, because the insult was public. The ground staff swallowed. Yes, sir. I'll call right away. Minutes later, Harold Reyes, the AeroLux Los Angeles station manager, appeared. He rushed in, his suit still untied. When he saw Derrick, he stopped. His eyes went from surprise to concern, then to seriousness. Mr. Coleman, he bowed. I have received the internal notification. We are in the process of verifying. No need for verification, Derrick interrupted, keeping his voice calm. I am the proof. He turned and looked around. Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant were just off the plane, their faces drained of color. They saw him surrounded by cameras, lights, and phones, and in that moment, all excuses vanished. Lauren approached trembling. Sir, if I had known you were Derrick, raised his hand and gently interrupted. It is because you only respect me when you know I am the CEO that this happens. My question is, if I were just a normal black man with no power, how would you treat me differently? That question needed no answer, because the answer was already evident in her eyes. A passenger behind blurted out, That's the scariest question. Lauren bowed her head, tears rolling down her face. Ethan stood beside her, not daring to breathe heavily. Harold, the airport manager, tried to keep his composure. Mr. Coleman, I apologize on behalf of the entire staff. It's not an incident, Derrick said slowly. It's a symptom of a disease that this industry has had for too long, a disease called prejudice. The crowd fell silent. Some put down their phones. Others nodded. Olivia still live, said softly into the camera. He didn't shout. He wasn't angry. But every word he said made the whole airport hold its breath. Derrick looked around, then pulled a thin document from his briefcase. He placed it on the reception desk. This is the AeroLux Airlines acquisition agreement, signed 18 months ago. Since then, all strategic decisions for the airline have been made through Coleman Industries. He paused, letting everyone understand. In other words, you discriminated against the owner of the company you work for. Lauren hiccuped slightly. Ethan tried to say something, but couldn't. Gregory Stanton, the platinum passenger who had been given priority seating, was just getting off the plane. He frowned at the scene. What's going on here? He asked gruffly. Olivia turned the camera back, and the live stream audience exploded with comments. Here, it's him. Derrick turned, his eyes still gentle but firm. Ah, Mr. Stanton. We should talk too. But first, let me finish this with my team. He looked at Harold. "Take down the names, positions, and employee numbers of Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant. I want them in an emergency meeting at the AeroLux Corporate Center. Tonight." Harold nodded. "Yes, sir." Derrick continued, "And I want this on record. No deletion, no censorship. Because what starts out in public ends out in public." Olivia whispered softly into the phone. This is the first time I've seen justice look like this. No shouting, no banging on the table, just a man standing still and letting the world bow its head." Gregory Stanton looked around, noticing many people turning around. "I don't understand. All this just because of a small misunderstanding." Derrick turned to him, his voice low. "A misunderstanding is only small when it does not cause harm. But when it causes a person to be deemed unworthy, just because of the color of his skin, it is no longer a misunderstanding, but a naked truth." Gregory was silent. That statement left him unable to reply. Derrick looked at his watch. "I'll be waiting in the conference room for 45 minutes. If I don't show up, we'll go through legal and HR." He turned and walked slowly, each step forcing the crowd to part. There were no police, no arguing, just the absolute silence of those who had just witnessed real power without raising their voices. As he passed Olivia, she lowered the camera and whispered, "Mr. Coleman, thank you for showing us the difference between power and dignity." He paused and smiling. "There is no difference. True power is dignity held in its proper place." Then he left, leaving behind a storm that had just begun. As Derrick stepped out of Gate 32, social media exploded. Olivia Park's video racked up 60,000 views in just half an hour. And back at the AeroLux Corporate Center, the 12th floor conference room was being prepared where justice would no longer be a concept, but an action. Harold Reyes, a veteran station manager at AeroLux who had worked in Los Angeles for nearly 20 years, paced the hallway. He had never felt the atmosphere so tense. Every employee, every pair of eyes looking at each other, as if they knew they were in the middle of an unstoppable storm. In the middle of the hall, Derrick Coleman was waiting. He looked the same calm, composed, unaccompanied. Harold stopped, took a deep breath, and walked forward. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice tinged with concern, "I've got all the data and video. Social media is blowing up. We're in the middle of a live media crisis." Derrick nodded slightly. "And that's why I don't want to deal with it behind closed doors." He looked around. Dozens of airport staff, passengers, and a few local reporters had gathered near Gate 32. Everyone was silent, waiting to see what would happen. Derrick pulled 3 documents from his briefcase and placed them on the reception desk. His voice was low and clear. "This is the AeroLux Airlines acquisition agreement, signed 18 months ago. This is Clause 12.4, the anti-discrimination policy I personally approved. And this," he held up the last file, "is the airline's internal complaint figures for the last quarter. There were over 127 complaints related to disrespectful behavior toward passengers of color." Harold looked at the pile of documents, his face pale. He understood this was no longer a collision on board, but a crack in the entire system. Derrick continued, his voice calm, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "We have too many repeat errors, and every report stops at noted. I don't need another record. I need action." He turned to Harold. "In the next 45 minutes, I want 2 employees, Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant, in the emergency room at AeroLux Corporate Center. Not to punish, but to get started." Harold swallowed. "Begin." "What?" "Sir, reform the whole system. The sound of those two words echoed through the hall like a sweet slash. Everyone understood when a CEO said restructuring. It meant hundreds of people, dozens of processes, and the entire company culture were being put on the operating table. A PR person approached Harold and whispered, "Mr. Reyes, the press has arrived. CNN Local, the Post, and the Los Angeles Tribune are all live streaming at the gate." Harold turned to Derrick, worried. "You want us to block the media?" Derrick looked out the window, where the afternoon sunlight filtered through the frosted glass, casting long golden streaks on the floor. "No," he said slowly. "We don't hide it." If the offense was public, then the correction must be public. Olivia Park, still holding the phone, whispered into the camera, "He is preparing for a public meeting, not for revenge, but to fix the whole system, I think. I have never seen anyone lead like this." Harold bowed his head. "Yes, sir. I will call them right away." He left, leaving Derrick standing in the crowd. A female reporter approached and asked cautiously, "Mr. Coleman, would you like to make an official statement about what just happened?" Derrick looked into the camera, his voice neither high nor low, but each word rang out clearly. "I didn't come here to speak. I came here to listen to those who have been overlooked, to customers who have been hurt, and to employees who are afraid, because justice begins not with words, but with silence that is properly heard." The remark stirred the crowd. A few applauded. Many others simply nodded a nod of genuine respect. About 30 minutes later, the emergency meeting room on the 12th floor of AeroLux Corporate Center was ready. A large screen showed live broadcast from Gate 32, where thousands of people were still watching. Harold walked in, breathing heavily. "Mr. Coleman, they're here. Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant have just been escorted from the plane." Derrick nodded slightly, saying nothing. He just put the documents on the table, sat up straight, his eyes not angry, just calm. The door opened. Lauren walked in first pale, eyes red. Ethan followed, his steps heavy. They stopped when they saw Derrick sitting at the head of the table. Lauren said softly, "Sir, You don't have to say anything now." Derrick interrupted. "We're going to talk here, with everyone watching, because this isn't just about you, or me. It's about our culture." Harold stood by, trying to hold his breath. Derrick turned on the big screen, showing the video from the plane, Lauren asking him to leave, Ethan refusing the procedure, Gregory Stanton sitting in 2A, and Olivia filming the whole thing. Everyone in the room fell silent. Breathing, heartbeats, keyboard tapping, it all seemed to blend together. As the video ended, Derrick said quietly, "This is not just a story about a man being insulted. This is a story about how we see people before we know who they are." He looked at Lauren and Ethan. "I don't want to fire you, at least not right now. I want to know, why do you think this happened?" Lauren choked up. "Because we're used to making assumptions. We think someone who looks like you doesn't usually sit there." Derrick nodded slightly. "Thank you for the truth." He turned to Ethan. "And you?" Ethan bowed his head. "Because I thought the white passenger was more important. I forgot that on a plane. Everyone is a passenger. No one is more important than anyone else." "You don't forget," Derrick replied, his voice soft but firm. "You choose to forget." The meeting room was dead silent. Those words were not angry, but like a mirror reflecting their own actions. Derrick took a deep breath and closed the folder. "We're not just going to fix this problem. We're going to change the way the entire company operates." He turned to Harold. I want to implement a 40-hour annual bias awareness training program for all frontline employees, and every complaint of discrimination must go directly to the CEO's office. Harold nodded. I will do it right away. Derrick stood up and looked straight into the camera. I don't need an apology. I need change. And that change starts with us, with AeroLux. The applause was quiet, but sincere. Lauren bowed her head, tears falling. Ethan closed his eyes and sighed, as if he had just let go of a long-standing burden. Olivia, still filming, whispered, He's not just giving himself justice. He's giving dignity back to a system that has forgotten it. Final scene. Derrick walks out of the conference room. It's dark. Through the glass, the lights of Los Angeles reflect on his face, calm, not smug, just the light of someone who just did the right thing. As Derrick left the meeting room, Lauren and Ethan remained silent. It was only when Harold read aloud the words Chief Executive Officer, signature verified, D. Coleman, on the minutes that they understood the truth. The person they had just insulted was the person who had signed their payroll for years. The AeroLux 12th floor conference room was still brightly lit in the late afternoon. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the glass windows, illuminating the table where the unfinished internal minutes were being written. The air was so thick that one could hear each person breathing. Harold Reyes put down his pen and tapped it lightly on the edge of the table. Lauren Baker. Ethan Grant. He read clearly, word by word. You will both stay for another 15 minutes to complete your report. Lauren and Ethan dragged their suitcases out, thinking the meeting was just a formality. The thought still lingered in their minds. Maybe they would just get a warning and then get on with their work. After all, they were AeroLux veterans. But as they stepped out into the hallway, they saw a sight that made their hearts sink. Derrick Coleman was standing in the media area, in front of a signing table with two small signs above it, Employee Accountability Hearing, Public Session. Beneath the sign were two familiar names, Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant. They both stopped. The wheels stopped rolling. Lauren felt her feet glued to the floor. Ethan glanced at her, his face rigid. What is happening? Lauren whispered, her voice trembling. Derrick looked up and saw them. He didn't move or gesture. He just looked a silent, heart-wrenching look. Olivia Park, who was still live streaming, turned her camera to them. Online viewers flooded in, thousands of comments pouring in. That's them, the woman asked him to leave. Justice is happening right now. Lauren's eyes welled up with tears. She took a few steps forward, her voice breaking. Sir, if I had known you were the CEO. Derrick interrupted, his voice not loud but causing the whole area to fall silent. It's because you only respect him when you know he's the CEO that this happened. He paused, his eyes boring into hers. How would an ordinary customer, one with no title, no power, and skin like mine be treated? Lauren froze. Ethan bowed his head, his hands clenched. The air was so heavy that only the sound of the ceiling fan could be heard. A few of the staff members standing nearby looked at each other, some in tears. Everyone understood that Derrick's question was not just for the two of them, it was for all of them. Derrick stepped closer. I'm not angry. I'm just sad, because we live in an age where respect is conditional. He looked straight at Lauren. Do you think fairness is only for people with titles? Lauren shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, sir. I just didn't think that far ahead. I just followed the procedure. No. Derrick shook his head slightly. You're out of habit, and that habit is the problem. Ethan looked up now, his voice hoarse. I've worked here for 20 years. I always thought I was fair. But now, I see. There are biases that have crept into the way I look at people, to the point where I don't even notice. Derrick nodded slightly. Thank you for the truth. He turned to everyone around him, his voice clear but not forceful. This is a lesson not just for the two of you. It is a reminder for all of us that a man's dignity is not in the suit he wears, but in how he is treated when no one knows who he is. Harold stood still, his head bowed. Olivia, still Liv, whispered into the camera. He didn't embarrass them. He woke them up. Derrick glanced at the two employees, then pointed lightly at the bulletin board on the table. They will both still be AeroLux employees if they choose to stay, but if they stay, they will be pioneers in awareness and fairness training. I want the people who made the mistake to be the ones to fix the system that created it. Lauren looked up, her voice choked. You still give us a chance. It's not that I'm being generous, Derrick replied. It's that I believe that punishment alone will never change anything. But if we make people understand why they're wrong and let them work together to fix it, that's true justice. There was a burst of applause. Not loud, not fake, just the kind of applause of people who had just seen something right. Olivia said softly, as if whispering to the audience. He not only kept the CEO seat, he kept the soul of a human being. Lauren sobbed, nodding repeatedly. I understand, sir. I'm in the program. I want to start over, Ethan echoed, his voice hoarse. Me too. Derrick looked at him, his eyes warming. Good. Let's start small, the way we look at others. Because sometimes, just one look can change someone's world. He signed the form in front of Harold. Just below the word CEO, signature verified D. Coleman. Derrick added a small, unwritten line. Respect is not a reward, it's the minimum. As he left the table, flashbulbs flashed. Dozens of reporters snapped photos, but Derrick didn't look at them. He just walked past Lauren, put his hand on her shoulder, and whispered, Nobody's perfect. Lauren! But everyone has the opportunity to be kinder. She burst into tears and nodded, unable to say a word. Ethan stood behind her, his eyes red and his head bowed low. Outside, the Los Angeles night had fallen. Streetlights reflected off the glass, casting a soft yellow glow across the hallway. Derrick paused at the exit, looking through the large glass that overlooked the entire airport. People bustled about, loudspeakers blared, and only one thing was clear to him. Justice isn't about losing someone's job. Justice is about making people see their worth and the worth of those they once took for granted. The next morning, every major newspaper carried the headline, CEO kicked out of first class. Airline changes policy. But what got people talking wasn't Derrick Coleman's power, but how he wielded it with quiet and a belief that people can be better when they're seen. The morning air in Los Angeles was crisp and cool, but inside the AeroLux Corporate Center headquarters, the temperature seemed to have dropped several degrees. The 12th floor, where the emergency meeting was taking place, was filled with tense silence. Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant sat at the end of the table, facing the firm's restructuring commitment letter. Olivia Park, invited as an independent witness, put her phone down on the table. No longer Liv. It was now the real action. Harold Reyes was standing by the door, receiving constant notifications from the media department. The clip has reached 10 million views. CNN wants to interview Mr. Coleman. The board of shareholders is in an emergency meeting. But Derrick remained calm. He stood before the big screen, remote in hand, preparing to move on to the part no one in the room was expecting. At that moment, the conference room door opened and Gregory Stanton, a white man in a silver-gray suit and sunglasses, walked in. He intended to just stop by to check on things and then leave, but the atmosphere in the room held him back. "Oh, it's more serious than I thought." Gregory half smiled, his tone a little patronizing. "I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I thought it was just a little misunderstanding on the plane." Derrick looked at him and nodded slightly. "Luckily, you came at the right time, because this part is related to you." Gregory raised an eyebrow slightly and took off his sunglasses. "What does it have to do with me? I didn't do anything other than sit in my seat." "The right seat," Derrick repeated, his voice low, but each word carrying weight. "The seat you got because someone was asked to leave. Not for medical reasons, not because of a system error, but because the person didn't look like the type of person who deserved to sit there." The air in the room was heavy. Lauren bowed her head. Ethan took a deep breath. Harold swallowed. Gregory forced a smile. "It sounds like you're blaming me." "I'm just a passenger, not running your airline." "Exactly," Derrick replied. "And I run it." Gregory paused, his smile fading. Derrick motioned for Harold to turn off the lights. The large screen behind him lit up, displaying a PowerPoint slide titled Business Relationship Overview AeroLux, Stanton Logistics Group. Derrick said slowly, "Your Stanton Logistics Group flies AeroLux an average of 320 times a year. Revenue from the airline service contract, $4,700,000 US. You have priority check-in, platinum status, and the status of strategic partner of the airline." Gregory nodded, half proud, half defensive. "Yes, it was a mutually beneficial partnership. I've been loyal to the firm for 8 years. Derrick moved to the next slide. The text appeared clearly: Coleman Industries 23% ownership in Stanton Logistics Group via subsidiaries. The conference room was completely silent. Gregory's eyes widened. His lips parted slightly as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Derrick continued, "That is, financially, I, the person you asked to take the seat, own almost a quarter of your company. I have voting rights on the board of directors. And if I wanted to, I could terminate the transportation contract between AeroLux and Stanton Logistics this afternoon." Gregory was speechless. His face was pale. Sweat began to bead on his temples. Derrick didn't look at him. He just said to Harold, "Get this on paper. Every AeroLux partner, big or small, will be held to the same ethical standards we apply to our own employees." Harold nodded, taking quick notes. Derrick turned back to Gregory. "You know, the irony here is that you have everything power, money, and status, but you don't have the most basic thing, respect for others. You don't need anyone to bow down to you, but you also don't have the right to make anyone else bow down to you because of the color of their skin." Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it. The room watched him, waiting. "Finally," he said softly, his voice trembling, "I didn't think that far ahead. I just acted as I always do." "And always is the problem," Derrick said, not angrily, just like a patient teacher. "You get so used to privilege that you think it's normal. But when privilege becomes the norm, fairness disappears." Lauren looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, perhaps because she realized she had acted that way. Ethan nodded, silently acknowledging something. Derrick stood up straight and looked around the room. "I don't want to put anyone down here. I want us to look at the facts. Because of one small act in first class, Millions of people are now talking about AeroLux, and I want them to see not just what went wrong, but how we're going to fix it." He paused, then enunciated each word clearly. "Mr. Stanton, I will give you two options. 1. AeroLux will terminate its contract with Stanton Logistics. 2. You sign a public apology agreement and participate in the Diversity and Equality in Corporate Partnerships program starting next month." Gregory stared at him, then sighed and nodded weakly. "I will sign. I can't deny that I was wrong." Derrick nodded slightly, as if expecting it. "Thank you. This is not a failure. This is an opportunity for us to learn how to be human again." He looked at Harold. "Prepare the documents. Invite the media department in. I want this statement to be released today." Olivia sat in the corner, turning on the camera. The light on Derrick's face was cold and bright, the light of someone who didn't need to prove power, but only wanted to use it to do right. The door to the conference room opened, and reporters rushed in. Derrick stood in front of the camera, speaking slowly, word by word. "Yesterday, I was asked to leave my first-class seat. Today, I sit here, not to retaliate, but to make sure that it never happens to anyone else, no matter who they are, what seat they sit in, or how much money they have in their account." The room was silent. Gregory bowed his head. Lauren wiped away tears. Ethan looked straight at Derrick, as if learning something greater than his profession. Olivia whispers into the camera, "That's how one black man turned humiliation into a lesson for the whole industry." Derrick turned back to look out the window, where the sunlight was shining brighter. He spoke softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "Justice is not about revenge. It is about resetting the scale for yourself, and for those who think they are better than others." As Gregory Stanton signed the pledge, the camera panned slowly over everyone's faces. Lauren, Ethan, Harold. They all knew this meeting was no longer about whose fault it was, but the beginning of a new chapter, where justice didn't have to be shouted to make people listen. The 12th floor conference room was bathed in the soft white light of a Los Angeles afternoon. Behind Derrick, the sky was clear, and AeroLux planes took off one by one, each one a testament to the fact that any system, no matter how large, must operate on the basis of fairness. Derrick stood and walked to the center of the room. A row of television cameras were trained on him, red lights flashing. The light on his face was not harsh. It was low, a reminder that all justice has a price. His voice rang out, deep and firm. "Today, we are not just dealing with a case. We are resetting the standard for how a human being is treated when boarding a flight." He stopped and looked directly at the two people sitting on his left, Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant. They sat close together, silent. Lauren's face was gaunt, her eyes red. Ethan looked as if he had aged 10 years overnight. Derrick opened the document on the table and read slowly to the camera. After reviewing all the evidence and video, as well as the responses from witnesses and the legal department, I, Derrick Coleman, CEO of Coleman Industries and owner of AeroLux Airlines, hereby declare Lauren Baker and Ethan Grant are terminated immediately. The sound of pen scratching on paper was audible. No one breathed. No one moved. Derrick continued, "Reason violation of Clause 12.4, anti-discrimination policy, causing serious reputational damage and creating legal risks for the company. No internal warning, no exceptions." Lauren trembled slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she said nothing. Ethan bowed his head, not daring to look up. Derrick looked at them for a long time. There was no anger in his voice, just the gravity of someone who knew he was doing the right thing, but also knew it would hurt someone else. "I'm not doing this for revenge," he said slowly. "I'm doing it because justice doesn't exist without boundaries. And that boundary is this: every passenger deserves the same respect." At the back of the room, Gregory Stanton, who was still sitting with his arms crossed, trying to appear calm, said, his voice a little harsh, "Mr. Coleman, I think this has gone too far. I've already signed the apology. I don't think it's necessary to drag out the contract or the flight ban." Derrick turned around, his eyes cold. "You might think so, but justice doesn't stop at a piece of paper." He took out another file and handed it to Harold Reyes. "Read it for me." Harold opened it and read it aloud to the camera. "Gregory Stanton, president of Stanton Logistics Group. AeroLux Airlines is proposing two options. 1. A lifetime ban from all routes within the AeroLux network. 2. Accept a series of corporate contract adjustments, including a review of the terms of the partnership, a reassessment of the representative's conduct, and participation in an image restoration program." Gregory chuckled. "No flying. Are you kidding? I'm your company's biggest partner." Derrick looked at him, unblinking. "And that's why you need to lead by example, because privilege without responsibility is a danger to the system." The words sucked the air from the room. Gregory froze, his lips trembling, but he was speechless. Derrick stepped closer to the table and said quietly, "You don't have to believe me, but you should believe this reputation can't be bought, and respect doesn't come from first class." Gregory was speechless. He knew that no lawyer could save him at that moment. This was no longer a legal matter. It was a moral test, and he had failed. Derrick turns back to the camera. "This company will never tolerate racism at any level. Discriminatory behavior is not only personally offensive, but it threatens the very survival of an organization because it destroys trust, which is more valuable than profits." Harold, standing by, bowed his head, his voice trembling. "Sir, other media outlets are watching. Reporters are waiting for the official announcement outside. Let them hear," Derrick said. "This is not an image accident. This is a turning point." He looked at Lauren and Ethan. "You can leave, but I hope one day, when you look back, you will understand today is not the day your career ends, but the day you begin to learn a different way of life." Lauren choked up, stood up, nodded, and said softly, "Thank you for still treating me like a human being." Ethan just replied softly, "I forgot about that for years. Now I remember." They left in silence, but their footsteps were lighter than when they came. Gregory sat still, his head bowed. Derrick returned to the desk and signed the final document. The screen behind him read in large letters, "Policy Enforcement, Immediate Effect." He put down his pen, raised his head, and looked straight at the camera. "Justice doesn't need to be noisy. It just needs to be done." The statement was broadcast nationwide for 30 minutes. Television called it the most expensive moment of silence in American aviation history. Outside, reporters were crowding to ask questions, but Derrick didn't answer. He just walked slowly out of the room and down the wide hallway, where the light from the glass reflected off the floor like a strip of silver. Harold followed, calling softly, "Mr. Coleman, do you regret it?" Derrick paused. "Regret?" He smiled slightly. "No, I just wish I didn't have to do this. But sometimes, to keep the sky clear, you have to clear the clouds first." He left, his back straight, his shoulders still calm. Behind him, the chatter faded into the air, leaving only silence. like an invisible justice that needed no justification. When the door closed, many thought the story ended there. But for Derrick Coleman, justice doesn't stop with who loses their job. It begins with how the system learns to treat all people more fairly. And that's where the plan to reform AeroLux began, not out of anger, but out of a belief that true justice should heal. 3 days after the incident, AeroLux Airlines held the largest press conference in the company's history. The 20th floor conference room at Coleman Industries headquarters was brightly lit, but the atmosphere was not one of crisis, but of a turning point. On stage, Derrick Coleman stood in front of a backdrop with white text reading, "Justice is not revenge, it's repair." Less tense than the previous meeting, his face was brighter, his eyes calm, but his voice was still deep and powerful. "We have seen what happens when prejudice is left to fester in silence," he began. "But today, we will demonstrate what happens when people decide to fix things, not blame." Hundreds of reporters fell silent. Lauren and Ethan, 2 former employees, didn't show up, but their names weren't redacted from the records. Derrick had asked that all the data from the previous meeting be preserved as a public lesson. He walked over to the electronic board, where the AeroLux Transformation Plan 2025 was displayed, a plan he had written and signed off on in just 2 nights. "We will not let one wrong act be a stain," Derrick said. "We will turn it into a milestone to move forward. And these are the first steps." He raised his hand, and the screen displayed the first line. 1. 40 hours year bias awareness program, starting next month. Derrick continued, "Every frontline employee from flight attendants to ground staff, including managers, will undergo at least 40 hours of training each year on how to recognize and eliminate bias in communications, not just about race, but also class, gender, and national origin." Below, slides show images of the instructor, a simulation of a real-life situation, and even video clips from Derrick's own flight as part of the lesson. "To serve people, one must first understand them," Derrick said. "No wisdom can exist without respect." A reporter raised his hand and asked, "Mr. Coleman, some people say forcing employees to take these courses is a form of collective discipline. What do you think?" Derrick smiled. "I don't see it as discipline. I see it as an apology, not verbal, but physical." The second slide appears new. Customer feedback system on each flight. "We will install a live feedback system on each passenger's personal entertainment device, allowing passengers to rate the level of respect they feel from the crew in real time," he explains. "That data will be sent straight to headquarters. No middlemen, no filters." A murmur arose from the back row. A Los Angeles Post reporter whispered, "It was the first time an airline had allowed passengers to monitor their own employees." Derrick heard, nodding slightly. "Transparency is not a threat. It is the only way to regain trust." Third slide appears. 3. Discrimination complaint. Automatically open investigation and suspend the person involved. Derrick spoke slowly, each word measured. "From now on, any passenger who reports racist or disrespectful behavior will trigger an automatic investigation. The named person will be temporarily suspended from work until the investigation is complete." Reuters reporter asked, "Sir, that may make many people worry about being slandered. Do you think that is too harsh?" Derrick replied, looking straight into the camera. "True justice always scares people, especially those who are used to living in privilege. But I believe, if you do the right thing, you should not be afraid of being investigated. And if you are afraid, it means there is something worth reviewing." The sound of camera clicking continuously. The last slide shows 4. Coleman Equal Air Fund, $500,000 year. Derrick looked down at the front row, where young students of color had been invited. He smiled. This fund was created to support students from underrepresented groups in the aviation industry. I want to see more pilots, engineers, managers, and leaders from historically marginalized communities. No one should be limited in their dreams because of the color of their skin. A young female student stood up and asked quietly, "Mr. Coleman, are you doing all this just because you were insulted?" The room fell silent. Derrick looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "No, I did it for the millions of others who have been hurt, but they have no voice. I am only lending my story so they can be heard." The answer brought a standing ovation. Not wild applause, but slow, thoughtful applause, the kind that shows true respect. Harold Reyes, standing in the back, quietly wiped his eyes. Olivia Park, who filmed the original video, filmed this ending and posted it online with the caption, "He doesn't use power to scare people. He uses it to make the whole system learn how to be human again." The video went viral within hours. CNN called it the most humane overhaul in American aviation history. That same afternoon, AeroLux stock soared, but Derrick paid no attention. He just looked out the window at the planes taking off, trailing long white trails of smoke across the sky. "In that moment," he said softly, as if talking to himself, "no one can erase the offense that has happened, but we can turn it into something that makes the world better." And as he left the auditorium, the last light of day fell upon his shoulders, low but warm. 3 weeks later, Derrick Coleman's speech has been viewed more than 20 million times. But more importantly, a number of other airlines have announced their own audits. The silent justice he initiated has now spread like wildfire, touching places where respect has long been neglected. It was a bright morning in early July, and Los Angeles was bright and sunny. In the office of Coleman Industries, Derrick was making coffee, not with an expensive coffee maker, but with an old French press he had used since his days as an employee. Harold Reyes walked in, holding a stack of newspapers and an iPad open to the news. "Mr. Coleman, you should see this," Harold said, his voice half excited, half surprised. Derrick put down his coffee cup and glanced over. The headline on the screen read, "Black CEO owns the airline that discriminated against him." New York Herald. Front page. Below is a photo of Derrick standing in the middle of the conference room, the light shining down, his hand signing the reform document. The article reads more than just a CEO who was insulted on his own flight. Derrick Coleman turned his pain into a plan to reform the entire industry, with calm, not anger. Derrick read a passage, then chuckled. "They act like I'm some kind of hero. I just did what needed to be done." Harold nodded. "Maybe, but you should see the results." He handed Derrick the iPad. On the screen was a map of the United States, with the logos of 7 major airlines. Below each logo was the text announcing bias policy review, inspired by AeroLux. Harold read slowly, Delta, United, SkyWest, Jetliner, Pacific Air. All announced that they would review their customer treatment policies. Some airlines even invited experts from the AeroLux training program to serve as consultants. Derrick was silent. There was not pride in his eyes, but relief. He took a sip of coffee, then said, "If a mistake can spread like wildfire, then a right thing can spread like lightning. It's just that people rarely believe it until they see it." At the same time, his phone rang. It was Olivia Park calling from New York. "Derrick, did you see that my live stream now has over 60,000 concurrent viewers? I never thought a video I shot with my phone would change the entire aviation industry." She laughed, her voice still full of energy. Derrick replied with a gentle smile. The world doesn't change because of videos. It changes because of people who dare to tell the truth. And you did. You made a bigger deal than I thought, Olivia replied. People call you the calm justice CEO. Derrick chuckled softly, his voice low. I like how they say silence. Because sometimes what speaks the loudest is not a scream, but a calm. Olivia nodded. Yesterday, CNN asked me to talk about the story. They showed you saying, justice doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be done. The whole studio stood up and applauded. Harold interjected, not only CNN. CNBC ran a story on AeroLux stock this morning. You should check it out. He flipped the screen. AeroLux's stock chart was up 17% in 3 weeks, a rare gain for an airline in the middle of the low season. What did the investors say? Derrick asked, not hiding his curiosity. Harold laughs. They say AeroLux has just done what no other company has dared to do. Reduce litigation risk, increase reputation score, and turn ethics into a competitive advantage. Derrick nodded slightly, his eyes looking far away. Sometimes the right thing is also the smartest thing. At noon, when he left the office, a group of reporters were waiting in the lobby. One of them, a reporter from the Los Angeles Times, shouted, Mr. Coleman, what do you think when people say AeroLux is profiting from the very incident that previously offended you? Derrick paused, his eyes not cold, just deep and a little tired. If a lesson makes the world behave better, then that benefit is something I am willing to share. The statement was recorded and spread widely on social networks. A Twitter user commented, he doesn't react with anger. He reacts with intelligence. And intelligence always wins in the long run. Hashtags #EHOR Silent Justice. Derrick Coleman or AeroLux reform are in the top 3 trending nationwide. That evening, in his apartment, Derrick sat alone on the balcony, looking at the lights of Los Angeles below. The city was still noisy and bustling, but in his heart there was only silence. The laptop next to it shows an email from the admin. Coleman Industries received more than 12,000 new job applications, especially from minorities. After his speech, he read it and smiled. That's enough, he whispered. As he leaned back in his chair, the TV news was playing on the local channel. Economists call this the Coleman effect, when integrity becomes a corporate asset. The image of him signing the reform document reappeared, accompanied by slow background music. The host said Derrick Coleman isn't just fixing an airline. He's teaching the corporate world that ethics isn't about cost. It's about capital. Outside, a gentle breeze blew, carrying away the sounds of the city. Derrick closed his eyes, recalling the moment on the plane, seat 2A. Lauren's suspicious gaze, her contemptuous voice, but instead of bitterness, he felt only gratitude. Because if it weren't for that morning, AeroLux would still be flying in the sky of prejudices no one dared to name. He said to himself, justice does not need to be won in a day. It only requires people patient enough not to give up. The lights of an airplane flashed past the window. In the Los Angeles night sky, an AeroLux was flying smoothly and straight. Derrick looked up and said softly, as if to himself, the sky would be fair if people learned to be fair to each other. And then, when the story seemed to be over, many people realized what Derrick Coleman left behind was not just a reformed airline, but a life lesson. That there are victories that come not from pushing others down, but from raising the standards of the whole world higher. 6 months later, autumn leaves were beginning to fall in Cambridge on the streets around Harvard Business School. A gentle breeze blew across Lake Charles. reflecting off Baker Hall, which was packed with students, faculty, and guests. A large sign behind the stage read, "Dignity in Aviation. Turning Bias into Systems." Derrick Coleman stepped up to the podium, his demeanor composed, no designer suit, no bodyguards, just a simple gray jacket, a dark blue tie, and a slight smile that mirrored the way he handled things slow, steady, and unpretentious. The hall fell silent as he spoke his first sentence, his voice warm and slightly hoarse with age. 6 months ago, I was asked to leave seat 2A on a flight of my own airline. Today, I stand here not to recount that story, but to tell what happened next. The rear screen lights up, showing the first graph. Customer satisfaction, 3.2, 4.6. Discrimination complaints down 78%. Settlement and litigation costs almost zero. There was a murmur of admiration. Derrick nodded and continued. This is not magic. This is what happens when we turn trauma into a learning system. He recounts the process not in dry management language, but in simple anecdotes. He talks about a young flight attendant named Maria, who was reluctant to serve black passengers because she didn't know how to act, but now becomes an in-house instructor for the Respect and Service course. He tells about an Asian pilot who feared he would be overlooked, but was promoted to a training captain. We don't just teach people about policy, Derrick says. We teach them about people. Because no system is good until the people in it learn to look at each other with respect. A student raised his hand and asked, "Mr. Coleman, have you ever thought that what happened on the plane that day, if you had gotten angry, if you had reacted strongly, maybe things could have turned out differently?" Derrick paused, his eyes darkening for a moment, then smiled. "I think so. If I get angry, they might fear me, but they won't learn anything. True justice doesn't scare people. It makes them think." The room was silent. Many of the older students who had worked in the airline or finance industries bowed their heads in contemplation. There are lessons that no textbook can teach, only life can teach them. On the screen, the next slide showed the Coleman Aviation Equity Fund, with dozens of young students studying in AeroLux training centers. A brown-skinned female student stood up and said with emotion, "Thanks to your fund, I am the first in my family to study to become an aeronautical engineer. Thank you, not just for the opportunity, but for the belief." The audience rose to their feet and applauded. Derrick bowed his head modestly. "I didn't give anyone a chance," he replied. "I just opened a door that should have been opened a long time ago." Professor Harrison Vale, who chaired the presentation, stepped up and told the crowd, "We are witnessing a classic case of leadership through dignity. No blame, no retaliation, just rebuilding from a moral foundation." Derrick looked around, then recounted a small memory. "After the incident, I received thousands of letters, some supportive, some critical. One wrote, 'You only did it because you have power.' I replied, 'No, I have power because I learned not to let my pride control me.'" The audience chuckled, but everyone's eyes understood. That was the difference between power and charisma. He continued, his voice low but full of emotion. "Leaders do not seek revenge. Leaders build a system so that future generations will not be humiliated like themselves." The words seemed to pierce the air. Heavy, but bright. Some people had tears in their eyes. The whole hall stood up and applauded for a long time. The presentation ended, but few people left. Many students stood in long lines just to shake Derrick's hand, say thank you, or simply want to get a closer look at him. As he left the auditorium, he paused at the door and looked back. His eyes were sad. as if remembering a man who had been relegated to economy class because of the color of his skin. But the sadness quickly disappeared, replaced by peace. Harold Reyes, now Executive Vice President of AeroLux, stepped forward, smiling. "Sir, Harvard wants to include your talk today in the official ethical leadership course." Derrick nodded slightly. "If it helps one more person believe that kindness still has value, then do it." As they stepped outside, the autumn wind blew the yellow leaves around the schoolyard. Derrick looked up at the sky. The sky was still clear, still blue. Still the AeroLux planes were gliding through, as calm as if there had never been a storm. He said softly, as if to himself, "It's strange. Sometimes the hardest landings are the ones that help us learn to fly higher." After his Harvard presentation, when the press thought the final chapter had closed, Derrick surprised everyone. For him, justice is not about eliminating wrongdoers. It is about giving them a chance to change. And the very people who hurt him have now become living proof of the value of change. The following winter, snow fell around a small Oregon airport, in a corner of Cascade Regional Airlines, a little-known local airline. A training class on recognizing bias in service was taking place. The instructor was a woman with neatly tied blonde hair and a slow, shaky voice. On a slide projected behind her, the words read, "Bias starts small, but it hurts deep." She introduced herself. "My name is Lauren Baker. I used to be a first-class flight attendant for AeroLux Airlines." The class fell silent. Many recognized her name from the incident last year, the one that had made headlines. Lauren took a deep breath and continued. "I used to believe I was just following the rules, but the truth is, I chose to follow my own biases, and I paid the price." The screen changed. It was an old video of Olivia Park, showing Lauren asking Derrick Coleman to leave seat 2A. Many students looked down, some blushed, some bit their lips. Lauren stood up straight, not hiding. "I lost my job. I lost my honor. But more importantly, I lost faith in myself. It wasn't until I took the Human Dignity and Service course that I understood respect doesn't start when the customer is a CEO, but when they are simply human." Behind her, a co-instructor smiled. It was Ethan Grant, the former chief flight attendant who had been with Lauren on the fateful flight. He now runs the Respect and Service program for small airlines across the United States. When Lauren finished, Ethan stepped up to the podium, his voice hoarse, his words slow. "I used to believe I understood the process. 20 years in the business made me think I had the right to decide who belonged in first class. Now I know just thinking that I was wrong." He looked straight into the audience. "Discrimination doesn't just ruin careers, it blinds you. I lost my job. But thanks to it, I learned how to be a human being again." The whole class stood up and applauded loudly, not because they were moved, but because they respected the courage of two people to admit their mistakes to the world. At the end of the day, Lauren looked out the window at the snow-covered airport. She received an email from Harold Reyes, now a vice president at AeroLux, with the subject line, "Keep teaching. We're proud of you." Lauren laughed through her tears. It was perhaps the first time she felt so lighthearted. On the other side of the country, another press conference was taking place at Stanton Logistics Group, Gregory Stanton's company. He stepped up to the podium, his face tired, his eyes dark from lack of sleep. Behind him was a simple banner: accountability, integrity, renewal. Gregory took a deep breath, then said slowly, "I am the person who took the seat of a black passenger, who I did not know was the CEO of AeroLux Airlines. But the issue is not who he is. The issue is that I believe I deserve more, just because of my skin color and status." The hall was silent. No camera clicks, no applause, just the weight of a true confession. Gregory continued, "It cost me. My company lost 3 major shipping contracts, costing it over $20 million a year. I learned that discrimination is not only morally wrong, it is business suicide." He looked up, looking straight into the camera lens. "I apologize, not just to Mr. Derrick Coleman, but to all those who have ever been treated like they don't belong. I was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my career correcting it." The remark was aired on television that evening. The comments section was divided between those who were sarcastic and those who were forgiving. But Derrick, upon seeing the scene, just nodded silently. Actually, that's true justice. When the wrong person says I was wrong, without anyone forcing him, he said to Harold Reyes, who was sitting next to him. Harold was silent for a moment and then asked, "Do you regret giving them a second chance?" Derrick chuckled. "No, I don't believe in erasing people. I believe in erasing behaviors. If they learn, then their mistakes have returned value to society." A few months later, Ethan and Lauren were invited to present their program at the newly opened AeroLux Training Center. Derrick attended in person. When Lauren entered the room, she froze for a moment, and Ethan bowed deeply. Derrick just smiled and said softly, "I didn't come here to talk about the past. I came here to thank you for turning your mistakes into lessons." Lauren choked up. She said softly, "Sir, if you had been angry back then, I might still think I was right." Derrick replied, his voice low, "Sometimes calm is the most powerful lesson, not to scare others, but to give them enough time to reflect on themselves." That day, when class ended, Lauren stood alone in the empty classroom, looking at the words on the board, "Respect starts where assumptions end." She took out her phone, took a picture of the board, and sent Derrick a text message. "Thank you, sir, for not using your power for revenge. Thank you for using it to teach us how to be better people." Derrick only replied with one sentence, "No one is born perfect, Lauren, but everyone has a chance to get right." Outside the window, the sunset shone on the wooden floor, warm and soft, and somewhere, in small American airports, passengers are served with more genuine smiles, more sincere eyes, because they are served by people who have deeply understood what it means to be misjudged. By now, the world has seen Derrick Coleman's story not as an incident, but as a reminder. True justice is not about bringing someone to their knees, but about helping people learn to stand up properly. And somewhere, in the open sky, each AeroLux plane is still flying, carrying the message that dignity is always a first-class ticket for every human being. It was a spring morning in Los Angeles. The sky was clear, and AeroLux planes bearing the iconic silver wings quietly rolled off the runway. In a conference room on the 20th floor of Coleman Industries, Derrick Coleman stood in front of the glass doors, looking down at the bustling LAX airport. The world had changed in 6 months, but something about him remained as humble as it had been that first day, the quiet of someone who had known humiliation and chosen to turn it into strength. Harold Reyes walked in, holding the latest report. "Customer satisfaction is up another 3% this quarter." "Derrick," he said, a small smile on his face. "But what surprised me most was that the number of discrimination reports coming into the system dropped to an all-time low." Derrick nodded slightly. "No one is born to be disrespected, Harold, but sometimes it takes a shock to learn respect again." He paused, watching the planes shrink in sight. A humiliation at 30,000 feet changes an entire industry on the ground. The remark did not carry a note of pride. It was more of a reflection, quiet, but profound. The story of Derrick, of AeroLux, of Lauren and Ethan is no longer news. It has entered classrooms, meetings, corporate training sessions, from Harvard to small community schools in Texas. People are citing Case Coleman as an example of how to respond intelligently to injustice. A journalist once asked Derrick in a television interview, "Sir, if the person asked to leave that day was not the CEO, but just an ordinary black man, would the outcome be different?" Derrick was silent for a long time. Then he spoke slowly, word by word. "That's what I'm most concerned about. So I don't want AeroLux to apologize just to me. I want AeroLux to apologize to all the people who were doubted because they didn't look like the person who had a right to sit in seat 2A. The host nodded, and the studio audience applauded, not for his answer, but for the truth he dared to speak. Respect should not depend on skin color or status. That evening, when he returned home, Derrick opened his laptop and read an email from a strange passenger. "Mr. Coleman, I am an engineer from Mexico. Last year, I was questioned by another airline employee because I brought my laptop and technical documents on board. They asked me if I was really an engineer. When I saw your story, I cried because for the first time, I felt like someone really understood me." He finished reading and sat quietly. The light reflected on the screen his pensive eyes, the eyes of someone who had been wronged, but now became a place where others found comfort. The next day, at the AeroLux executive meeting, Derrick announced a new project, Project Horizon, turning emotions into policy. From now on, every passenger who has experienced discrimination will be able to share their experience directly on the AeroLux portal. We will collect, analyze, and turn it into data to update processes, train, and redesign how the system responds. He explains, "You want to open the door to negative stories too, that could lead to a media attack?" Harold asked. Derrick smiled. "If we are afraid of the truth, we will never progress. A system is only truly strong when it dares to look at its own wounds." The project was launched, and in just 3 months, thousands of people sent in their experiences, small stories, sometimes just unfriendly looks or prejudiced name-calling. All were recorded, processed, and reflected in the training program every month. AeroLux publishes the Equality Pulse Report as part of its commitment to transparency. The numbers are not just data, but evidence of a healing society. A year later, at the airline's anniversary celebration, Derrick stood on stage, didn't give a speech, just recounted a small moment. "Not long ago, I was on a domestic AeroLux flight. An elderly black man got on, confused because he had a duplicate seat. A young flight attendant approached not Lauren, not Ethan, but a new girl. She bowed, smiled, and said, 'I'm sorry, sir. It's a system error. But you stay here. I'll take care of it for someone else.'" Derrick paused, his voice low. "I didn't say anything. I just sat there. But in my heart, I knew the justice we seek isn't far away. It's in every little action like that." The audience applauded loudly, and in the front row, Lauren, Ethan, and Gregory, all of whom had made mistakes, clapped too, not in praise, but as a silent pledge they understood. The stage lights softened. Derrick spoke the final word softly. "When the person being discriminated against is the person holding institutional power, discrimination is not just morally wrong, it is professional suicide. Because in today's world, dignity is no longer a privilege. It is a standard of survival. That night, an AeroLux 747 took off from Los Angeles, heading into the pitch-black sky. Inside, passengers were of all colors, nationalities, and classes. No one knew they were flying the airline that had been embroiled in the biggest scandal of the previous year. But perhaps that was why the flight was so peaceful. The young flight attendant walked by, smiling and greeting the middle-aged man in row 2A, the seat that had started it all. She didn't know it was Derrick Coleman, and perhaps he didn't want her to know. He just nodded slightly in return, then looked out the window, where the sky was tinged with the setting sun, in the warm, dim light. Derrick smiled, a quiet smile, the smile of someone who knows that justice doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. It just needs to be seen in the kindness of people toward each other. Derrick Coleman's story makes us realize how we treat those without power is the true measure of our character. A seemingly small act of discrimination, a contemptuous look or a thoughtless word, sometimes enough to lose a career, honor, and the trust of others. Derrick taught the world a simple yet profound lesson. Leaders don't seek revenge. Leaders build systems so others don't have to suffer the same humiliation. When we choose calm over anger and choose to fix systems over punishing people, we not only save ourselves, but also future generations from repeating the same mistakes. Remember, respect does not come from titles or possessions, but from looking at others with fairness. And in a world full of prejudice, wisdom and kindness are the most lasting power. Thank you for reading this story. If you believe that justice does not need to be shouted out loud to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe to spread stories of kindness, courage, and the power of people when they choose to do the right thing. See you in the next story, where justice is still written with calmness and kindness.